Hello, everyone. My name is always Asmal. Welcome to another episode of Tooways to Skin a Cat, special birthday edition. This is a show where we talk career experiences, entrepreneurship, and investments. The main aim is to show that there's more than one way to be successful other than just climbing the corporate ladder. We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube, and the show will be available on podcast by tomorrow. For those listening on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, please leave a rating for the podcast. Now, if you're watching us live, drop a one in the comments so that I know I'm not talking to myself, and drop a two in the comments if you're watching the recording. My guest for this week is Althea Trout, an experienced business analyst and a certified product owner. Althea, thanks so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome. I'm very happy to be here.
Let's jump straight into the meat of it. Tell us your story. Where do you come from? And even outside of work, who is
Yeah,
Althea Trout? Give us the
yeah.
backstory.
No problem. Althea is a very curious business analyst, and I think even without my job title, I'm just curious by nature, and it really helps me in my job. But outside of my work life, when I'm walking around, when I'm shopping, when I'm just experiencing, fun things, I'm always wondering how things are put together, what happens when they break, why people respond in certain ways to crisis. So those are the things that interest me. And it's a perfect match for my job because that's actually what I do every day. But yeah, I live in Cape Town. I've been doing business analyst work for a very long time. I won't say how long, but it's more than 10 years. And I love it to bits. I think I'm probably going to be doing this for the rest of my career. Touch wood. I hope that's what I get to do. It really keeps my brain young because I'm often thinking and problem solving and just trying to keep up with trends because technology changes so often. That is me in a nutshell. I'm not as much of a workaholic as I used to be. I'm trying to manage my work life balance. I'm getting better at it every year.
We keep trying. We keep trying. Now, I notice with a lot of business analysts, they talk about business analysis or being as if everybody understands what they mean. But for the rest of us, business analysis sounds very vague. So, what does a business analyst actually do?
I always laugh when people outside of the corporate world ask me this because what I've been told, what people sometimes tell me they think it is so different to what it actually is. Somebody who was interviewing to be a BA, it was a very young person, graduate, but they didn't have any technology experience or BA experience. And they thought it was someone who's an entrepreneur who starts businesses. It's actually not that. Um, Being a BA is kind of like I explained it to somebody once as when you have a problem at home, like you have a plumbing problem, for example, and you phone a plumber and you tell them, hey, there's a leak somewhere in my house, right? So you're telling them the problem, the thing that is upsetting you or disrupting your day. They will come in, they'll fiddle a bit with the pipes, they'll lift things, move things around, and they'll try to find the root cause of the issue. And once they do, sometimes they might actually not find the root because they might say it could be this, or it could be this, or it could be this. But you might then pay them to figure out exactly what it is and then come back to you and say, I can fix it in one of five ways. This is how much it's going to cost you. I might need to knock out the wall. That is my job, but in the work world. So a client might come to me and say, people are not using our HR system or our whatever system they are using. Let's figure out why. Or we think we are losing customers. We don't know why. So I go in, I help figure it out. One of the most common things that I do these days is helping clients deploy new technology and sometimes just looking at the existing technology and figuring out how to make it better. So if you think of a store, right, they use apps and tech in their store, like they use a point of sale system. To get that point of sale system up and running, there's often a business analyst involved because we need to think about how do we switch it on, and there's a number of things we need to do before we can switch it on. So I need to think about who's going to use it. What are the features on the point of sale system they need to use? Is there software involved? Is there hardware involved? If we're going to be using hardware, what is the cost of it? How sustainable is it to use hardware versus being a bit more digital? These are all the things you must think about. And besides the tech side of things, I also have to spend time thinking about the process the cashier might need to follow to use certain features of an app. So if you ever go shopping and the cashier is trying to do something on the point of sale that frustrates you, those are the problems that come to me, and I have to figure out how to make it better.
So almost like clearing up some electronic red tape is one of the things
Yes,
that you do. Okay, okay.
exactly.
And I'm assuming it's generally for medium and large size businesses. You wouldn't do it in small businesses. Am I right?
You can do it everywhere. Being a business analyst, you can do it inside of corporate, you can do it as a social activity. And something I always keep on the back of my mind, I joke about this often, when I go to use our public services, and Cape Town's public services are actually super epic. But now and again, somebody will tell me they had to go to the clinic, for example, and they spent the whole day there because they had to sit in a queue. My brain is thinking there's no reason why people have to sit in a queue for an entire day. There's so many ways we could make that better. So one day when I'm super rich and bored and I don't need a corporate job, I'll maybe go work for the city of Cape Town to help them figure out some of those problems. But yeah, that is kind of the thing that I do, and you can apply it everywhere. I do these days. I do work with larger clients, but it varies very often, and my work is very project based. So a client could say, we're starting out from scratch deploying a system and everybody's going to use it, like 30,000 or 50,000 people. Or they might say, it's a little bit smaller, it's just for the IT team, which is a much smaller population. So lots of variety in my job. There's always something new. The project work, the cycle we follow is always the same, but the people make it super interesting because there's always some new I don't want to say characters, some new problems. People come with different perspectives, and that keeps it fresh all the time.
It sounds like what you're doing this week is going to be very different from what you did 3 months ago
Yeah.
and very different from what you did 6 months before that.
Yes. Yep.
Tell me, is there a specific qualification needed to be a business analyst?
Very interesting question. Over the years, I've spent some time in like network industry groups. And there's a lot of professional forums you could join if you wanted to learn more about the practical side of being a PA. Yes, there are qualifications that you could do. Myself, how I got into business analysis was by accident, purely by accident. And as I met more and more BAs over the years, I hear very similar stories. It's often somebody who was working in a department who became a specialist in that space, in that domain, like HR or finance or payroll, and then or IT, even retail, logistics. They become a specialist, but there's something about the way they think which makes them a great BA candidate. So for me, I started working when I was working in retail. I used to train store managers. That was one of my very early jobs. And at some point, the company I was working for, they procured an HR system, and I loved figuring things out. So I got the opportunity to work with this HR system because I already had HR domain knowledge. I understood what goes on in HR without the technology. So then for like a year, I spent time just supporting people who needed to use that system. And the basic knowledge that I needed there was to understand the system, understand what this button does, understand what the features are, what are the reports, and then help everyone else to use it. Every now and again, somebody might come to me and say, I'm trying to do this, but it's not working. Or I'm trying to do this and I'm getting an error. And it was my job to help them figure out what's happening. And that was before I had a qualification. And once I realized I actually like doing this, then I went to study. FDI is a very popular course. They've got a number of popular courses that you can take, and it's quite rigorous. But you basically could take a 6 months, a year course and do something practical, and you'll get either a diploma or a certificate. But it's one of those things that fits into other degrees or into other qualifications. You could still become a business analyst without any qualification. I will say that.
That's very, very interesting. For the audience, we'll be responding to questions towards the end. So please add your questions to the comment section now so that we don't miss them. And you briefly mentioned it, but I also saw on your profile that you worked in HR.
Yeah.
So did you start in did you actually have an HR, like I'm working in HR in an HR position in it, or it was one of the side roles that you had within that role that you were doing?
Yeah. I started, let's go way back. When I was at varsity and I finished studying, I spent a year at varsity while I wasn't studying because I had a job there. And I also did performing arts, and I did it for a very short while. So I'm not an actress or anything. I always like to say I'm a behind the scenes person. Like I'm the person that's, behind the curtain, picking things up and helping the crew get dressed. But one of my very first things that I did on campus was I used to train performance arts workshops. And from there, I realized I love facilitating. I love teaching training. And so my first corporate job was actually as a trainer. I was training people in call centers, and then I became a retail trainer. And that stuck with me over time. So I stayed in training and development as a specialist, working with sometimes other specialists like recruiters, like talent managers, and now and again I would work with generalists as well. But myself, I've always been a specialist in learning and development. And I think that is so helpful being a business analyst because you have to have a learning mind. I always like to tell people when they're choosing technology, others might tell me this, I'm speaking at the nonsense, it might be debatable, but I like to say an app is an app is an app. It doesn't almost matter what app you choose to use. Yes, there are pros and cons, there's pricing considerations, there's support considerations. But these days, different app developers and competitors, they keep up with each other. If one app is doing two cool things, you'll soon see the rest of the competition will be doing the same thing. Yeah. So for me, what that means is I always have to have a learning mind because I have to watch out for these things. What are these different developers doing? How are people receiving it? How are they using it? Because sometimes you'll put a feature out and you think people are going to use it one way, but they use it an entirely different way.
I suppose, yeah. Well, the UX and it would be very different to what you intended.
Yeah.
But I noticed also that you are a certified product owner. So
Mm-hmm.
what does a product owner do?
Oh, product owner, and if you go onto LinkedIn, you'll probably see many titles similar to this one. Product ownership. You'll see people who are project managers. So these type of jobs are kind of cousins of each other with business analysis. So as a product owner, what you would do is you would own whatever the one or more bits of technology in a company. So if you think about the HR system in a large organization or the finance system or the payroll system, there could be thousands of users using that system. And very often there will be people the ones that get the most value out of it because they're using it every day. People are allowed to give their feedback about how the system is functioning. So you might use your payroll or finance system and say, I wish the system could do this. I wish there was a feature for this or that. And you would have developers sitting in your IT team who would make that happen. Now, if 10,000 people were sending feedback like that, and your IT team was consuming them and applying all of them, you might end up with a system that is just nuts, that's doing too many different things. And sometimes you might end up having your IT team develop a feature that sounds amazing to 10 people, but actually over the long run, it doesn't really add value for your company as a whole. So your product owner needs to understand what is your company's vision. So if you think about a system that your customers are going to use, especially if you say that your customer strategy is X, then what you're doing with your technology needs to marry up with that. I can't decide as a product owner, I'm going to add a feature that does something that my customers are actually going to find no value in. So your product owner's job is to make sure that that vision is held. They engage with different parties, such as the users using the system, the IT team, and some other stakeholders to marry everything together. But at the end of the day, it is their job to make sure that your vision stays on course, because it's all about sustainability, right? I can't tell you how many times it's very hard to manage to tell people who are using the system and are really passionate about the features in the system because they use it every day. It's very hard to have to tell somebody, I like your feature, but it's not a priority for us to develop that particular feature right now. And if you think about Microsoft, for example, or some of the other apps we use every day, LinkedIn, etc., when you're using the system or the app, there's often an opportunity to give feedback. So when you log into a Microsoft app, you'll see a survey pop up in the corner and it will say, give us 2 minutes of your time and tell us what you think about this application. Now that feedback is part of the feedback that a product owner would take. They listen to what the customer is asking for. And then the other feedback might be, when you're using a system and it annoys you because you're trying to do something, and you get really mad and you go, I'm going to write these people a strongly worded email. So that feedback also ends up going somewhere, but not all of that feedback can be used. So that is the unfortunate bad job of a product owner, is to make sure things stay on course, make sure we're building the right features, managing the ROI, the cost that we're spending on maintaining an application, and still making sure that the company gets value and meets its goals.
Okay. So, you've explained to us what a business analyst does, what a product owner does. And now, I hear people bandy about this word, and I think it's more in IT, but I'm going to ask you as the expert. I hear this word Scrum and Scrum Master, and they just throw it out like everybody understands what a Scrum and a Scrum Master. The only Scrum I know is the one in rugby.
Rugby.
So, what is a Scrum and a Scrum Master? Tell me.
Yeah. Probably some of my peers are going to roast me for this. So Scrum and Agile and product ownership, again, it's all the terms that you might hear together when you're speaking to, especially IT peeps, but not only them. So Scrum is one of many methodologies that you could use to manage a team that is working together to meet some goals. So you do often find it in IT, but you can use it elsewhere. It's just a methodology to manage the work that's coming through. So if a product owner is the one keeping the vision on track and they are working with the IT teams over a year, for example, to make sure that the app stays maintained, that bugs are resolved, that new features are being built, what happens behind the scenes to actually switch on features, like a reaction button in LinkedIn where you can thumbs up or put a happy face. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. And part of that work is to work with your counterparts to understand which features are we going to build first, which ones are going to give us the most benefit first. And often that is done in iterations. So it's just a methodology to use. It helps the teams, the cross-functional teams like the PO, the testers, the IT team and others. It helps them to have a framework within to work. So they might work in almost like time slots, iterations. So over 2 weeks, for example, they might say in 2 weeks, this is how much we could build. And then they just focus on that and they build it out. So they work in sprints, for example. There is a whole Scrum guide with a set of principles that are applied. And again, if you went onto LinkedIn and you popped the question on about Scrum and what is right and wrong, you'll get 100 different answers. Some people will say to you, if this is the Scrum guide and this is the framework, this is how it must be done. And others will say, actually, that's unrealistic because our job doesn't look like that every day. We use it, but we use it in a different way. But yeah, lots of heated debates. There's lots of content around Scrum and product ownership online. I always just chuckle when I read some of people's comments because people are very passionate about Agile and they will let you know when they think you are not right.
So then it's things that are very similar. I'm glad I asked you because I was clueless before this. I don't see any questions coming from the audience, so that means you've been answering all the questions exactly what they
Awesome.
need. Um, is there any last few words from you or anything we didn't discuss that you'd like the audience to know?
Yes. So I'm very surprised when I think about how the world of work has changed these days. And I'm not sure if it's just me, but I'm really, as I'm getting further into my career, I'm starting to take things less seriously because I feel like I've earned my stripes. I still learn lots of new things every day, but I feel like there's so much joy to be found in your work. Um, Forget what you've thought about climbing the corporate ladder. Like, I'm a specialist as a business analyst. I'm a specialist. I could have gone junior BA, senior BA, lead a team, whatever. But you don't have to do that these days. Especially, you can move laterally, or you can remain a specialist, and you can retire a specialist. There's so much value and experience that you can add to your teams, to a company, as a specialist. You don't have to become the head of a department or a GM if you don't want to do that. And there's lots of opportunity for you to become, just to pivot. So some specialists will just work in HR or finance or, logistics. If it excites you, you can try different domains and see what that means for you. But again, there's never a dull moment. There's so much happening technology wise. Have fun with your career. Really play with it. Speak to people in the industry, especially. There's so many peeps that will DM me on LinkedIn to ask me how I became a business analyst. And I'll always say, don't be scared to ask your current manager or whoever your mentors are at work about opportunities. So if you are currently a specialist that's not a BA, but you want to become a BA, a common question I get asked is, how can I do that? Do I need to go and study? I will say, look for opportunities. Sometimes it's in IT, sometimes it's not. And just ask for an opportunity. Ask, how can I transition? I'm willing to learn. Help me figure out a plan that I can do this learning on the job. And when I'm ready, then make an investment in me and maybe send me for training. You don't always have to go, Mr. Manager, will you spend 20,000 Rand on me and send me for training so I can become a BA? You can do it without that. And that also gives you an opportunity to see if it is a career that you want to be spending a couple of years in.
That ties into the theme of the show of there's more than one way to be successful other than just climbing the corporate ladder. So that is the
Absolutely.
perfect way to end. The show has been live on YouTube and should be available on podcast by tomorrow. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast and you feel that it's added value, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on that notification bell to get automatically notified when the next episode comes out. Althea, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks everyone for joining us for another episode of Tooways to Skin a Cat. Goodbye.
Goodbye.